The lecture hall door slammed shut, and my heart stopped. Professor Elias Warren's voice, smooth as aged whiskey, cut through the silence. "Elliot, stay after class." His words weren't a request, they were a tether, pulling me into a moment I wasn't ready for. I was just another junior at Haverford College, a small liberal arts school nestled in Pennsylvania's rolling hills. My life was a blur of late-night study sessions, lukewarm cafeteria coffee, and dodging questions about my future. I'd always been the quiet one, the guy who blended into the background, content to observe rather than act. But in Professor Warren's American literature class, something shifted. His lectures weren't just lessons. They were performances, each word deliberate, each pause heavy with meaning. He had this way of looking at you, like he saw the parts you didn't even know you were hiding. That day, the topic was Walt Whitman, and Elias Professor Warren, had been electric. His gray eyes sparked as he quoted Leaves of Grass, his hands slicing the air like he was carving the words into the room. I couldn't look away, not because of Whitman, but because of him. There was something raw in his passion, something that made my chest tighten in ways I didn't understand. "Elliot," he said again, softer now, as the last student shuffled out. I stood at my desk, clutching my worn copy of Whitman, my palms sweaty. The room felt too big, too empty, just the two of us and the hum of the overhead lights. Elias leaned against his podium, his tailored blazer slightly rumpled, a faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. At 40-something, he was older than most professors here, but he carried himself with a quiet intensity that made him seem timeless. "I noticed your essay on Whitman," he said, crossing his arms. "It was remarkable. You saw something in his work most students miss." His gaze locked onto mine, and I swear I forgot how to breathe. "You wrote about love as defiance. Why?" I swallowed, my throat dry. Don't know. It just felt true. Whitman's words, they're not just about love. They're about fighting for it, even when the world says you shouldn't. My voice cracked, and I cursed myself for sounding so young, so unsure. Elias nodded, his expression unreadable. "Fighting for it," he echoed, almost to himself. He stepped closer, and the air between us thickened. "Have you ever had to fight for something like that, Elliot?" The question hit like a punch. My mind flashed to late nights in my dorm, scrolling through forums, reading stories of people like Megwes who liked guys, who kept it buried because small towns like mine didn't take kindly to different. I'd never said it out loud, not to anyone, but the way Elias looked at me, like he already knew, made my defenses crumble. "I don't know what you mean," I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. He tilted his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Don't you?" Before I could answer, he turned to his desk, pulling out a small, leather-bound notebook. "I want to show you something," he said, his tone shifting, softer now, almost vulnerable. He opened the notebook, revealing pages of handwritten quotes, poems, and sketches. "This was mine when I was your age. I used to write about the things I couldn't say out loud." I stared at the pages, my fingers itching to touch them. The words were raw, jagged, full of longing and fear. One line caught my eye. "I am not what they see, but I am more than they'll ever know." "Professor Warren," I started, but he cut me off. "Elias," he said firmly. "Call me Elias when it's just us." My heart thudded. This was dangerous territory. He was my professor, my mentor, someone I was supposed to respect from a distance. But the way he said it, the way his eyes softened, made me want to cross that line. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice trembling. He hesitated, his fingers tightening around the notebook. "Because I see you, Elliot. I see the way you hold back, the way you're afraid to let yourself be you." He took a step closer, and I could smell his cologne woodsy, warm, grounding. "I was like you once, hiding, afraid. But someone helped me find my voice. I want to do that for you. I didn't know what to say. My mind was a storm of questions, fears, and something else, something warm and reckless that made me want to stay in this moment forever. But then he closed the notebook, breaking the spell. Think about it, he said, his voice steady again. Come to my office hours tomorrow. We'll talk more. I nodded, unable to form words, and grabbed my bag. As I walked out into the crisp autumn air, my head spun. Elias Warren wasn't just my professor anymore. He was a mystery, a mirror, and maybe, just maybe, something more. The next day, I couldn't focus. My morning classes blurred into a haze of equations and lecture notes. But all I could think about was Elias. His notebook, his words, the way he'd looked at me like he saw straight through my carefully built walls. By the time I reached his office, tucked in a quiet corner of the English department, my nerves were frayed. The door was ajar, and I knocked lightly, my heart pounding. Come in, Elias called, his voice warm but edged with something I couldn't place. His office was a sanctuary of books and chaos. Shelves overflowed with novels, poetry collections, and dog-eared journals. A single window let in slants of late afternoon light, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. Elias sat at his desk, grading papers, his glasses perched on his nose. He looked up and smiled, and my stomach flipped. Elliot, he said, setting his pen down. I'm glad you came. I sat across from him, clutching my backpack like a lifeline. I thought about what you said, about finding my voice. He leaned back, studying me, and I took a deep breath. I don't know how. I've spent my whole life keeping quiet. Where I grew up, small town in Ohio, you didn't talk about certain things. I paused, my hands twisting in my lap. I don't even know if I'm ready to say it out loud. Elias's expression softened. You don't have to say anything until you're ready. But you need to know you're not alone. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out the same leather-bound notebook. This was my lifeline when I was your age. I grew up in a place like yours, rural, conservative. I thought I'd have to hide forever. I leaned forward, drawn in despite myself. What changed? He hesitated, his fingers tracing the edge of the notebook. Someone saw me. Really saw me. My college professor. Actually. He laughed softly, but it was tinged with sadness. He was the first person I told I was gay. It was terrifying, but it saved me. The word hung in the air, gay. My breath caught. I'd never heard someone say it so plainly, so unapologetically. My mind raced, torn between fear and relief. He'd just laid his truth bare, and it felt like an invitation to do the same. I've never told anyone, I admitted, my voice barely audible. But I think I might be, like you. Elias's eyes softened, and for a moment, I thought he might reach across the desk. Instead, he nodded. That's a brave thing to say, Elliot, even just to yourself. The room felt smaller, the air charged with something unspoken. I wanted to ask him more about his life, his past, how he'd found the courage to be himself. But before I could, there was a knock at the door. Professor Warren. A woman's voice, sharp and professional. Elias tensed, his relaxed demeanor vanishing. One moment. Dr. Harper, he called, then turned to me. We'll continue this another time. Friday, after class. I nodded, grabbing my bag and slipping out as Dr. Harper, a stern woman in a blazer, stepped inside. She barely glanced at me, but her presence felt like a cold wind, cutting through the warmth of our conversation. As I walked across campus, the autumn leaves crunching under my sneakers, I felt lighter and heavier all at once. I'd said it, out loud, to Elias. But now what? He was my professor, someone I was supposed to keep at arm's length. Yet every word he said, every look he gave me, pulled me closer to a truth I wasn't sure I could handle. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, staring at my laptop, the cursor blinking on a blank document. I wanted to write, to spill out everything I'd kept locked inside. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I opened Whitman's Leaves of Grass and read until my eyes burned, searching for the courage Elias seemed to think I had. By Friday, I was a mess of anticipation and dread. When class ended, I lingered, my heart racing as the other students filed out. Elias caught my eye and nodded toward the door. "Walk with me," he said. We ended up at a small coffee shop off campus, tucked away in a quiet corner of town. Over steaming mugs of coffee, he told me about his life growing up in a small southern town, the fear of being found out, the freedom of coming to terms with who he was. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the weight of those years. "You don't have to have it all figured out," he said, stirring his coffee, "but you deserve to live without hiding." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to be brave. But as we left the shop and stepped into the cool evening air, I saw Dr. Harper across the street, her eyes narrowing as she spotted us. And suddenly, I realized this wasn't just about me and Elias. There were eyes watching, rules we were dangerously close to breaking, and secrets that might not stay buried for long. Dr. Harper's stare burned into me as we crossed the street. Her lips were a thin line, her eyes flicking between Elias and me like she was piecing together a puzzle. I wanted to shrink, to disappear into the pavement. But Elias kept walking, his stride calm and unbothered. "Everything okay?" he asked, glancing at me as we reached the campus quad. I nodded, but my stomach churned. "She saw us," I muttered. "Dr. Harper." She looked suspicious. Elias's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. "She's just protective of the department. Don't worry about it." But I was worried. Haverford was small, and gossip spread like wildfire. I'd heard whispers about professors getting too close to students, about careers ruined over less. Elias was risking something by talking to me like this, by sharing his past. And I was risking something to me anonymity, my carefully guarded secret. Over the next week, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. In class, Elias was his usual charismatic self, but there was a new tension in his glances, a flicker of caution. I started noticing things, the way Dr. Harper lingered after his lectures, the way other students whispered when I stayed behind to talk. I told myself I was paranoid, but the weight of it pressed heavier each day. One evening, I found myself back in Elias's office. The door closed this time. He was grading papers again, but his focus kept drifting. "You've been quiet," he said, setting his pen down. "What's going on?" I hesitated, my fingers twisting the strap of my backpack. "I'm scared," I admitted. Whatever this ice, it feels like it's going somewhere it shouldn't. People are noticing." Elias leaned forward, his elbows on his desk. "I know it's complicated. I'm your professor. There are rules. But I'm not doing this to cross lines. Elliot, I'm doing this because I see you struggling, and I know what that feels like." His words were a lifeline, but they also stung. Was that all this was? Mentorship? Guidance? Or was there something more in the way he looked at me, the way his voice softened when we were alone? I didn't know, and the not knowing was tearing me apart. "Let's do something different," he said suddenly, standing up. "There's a poetry reading downtown tonight. Off campus. No students. No colleagues. Just words and people who love them. Come with me." I should have said no. Every rational part of me screamed to stay away, to keep this professional. But the part of me that craved connection, that wanted to know more about Elias, won out. "Okay," I said, my voice barely audible. The reading was in a dimly lit bookstore, the kind with creaky floors and mismatched chairs. The crowd was small, mostly older locals, a few artsy types with tattoos and piercings. Elias fit in effortlessly, his laughter easy as he chatted with the organizer. I felt out of place. my sneakers scuffing the floor. But when the reading started, I forgot my nerves. The poet was a woman named Mara. Her voice sharp and haunting as she read about love and loss and secrets kept too long. Elias leaned close, whispering context about the poems, his breath warm against my ear. I tried to focus on the words, but all I could think about was his presence, his warmth, the way his knee brushed mine in the cramped seating. Afterward, we walked through the quiet streets, the air crisp with the promise of winter. "What did you think?" Elias asked, his hands in his pockets. "It was intense," I said. "Her poems, they felt like they were pulling something out of me, something I've been holding onto too long." He stopped walking, turning to face me. "That's what art does, Elliot. It forces you to feel the things you're afraid of." His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I thought he might say something that would change everything. But then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "It's late. Let's get you back to campus." The drive back was quiet, the hum of the car filling the space between us. When he dropped me off at my dorm, he hesitated, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "Elliot," he said, his voice low, "be careful who you trust with your truth. Not everyone will understand." I nodded, my throat tight. As I watched his car disappear into the night, I realized I was falling for him, not just his mind, his passion, but him. And that terrified me more than anything. Back in my room, I opened my laptop and started writing. Not an essay, not notes, but a poem. It was messy, raw, full of the things I couldn't say to Elias or anyone else. When I finished, I stared at the words, my heart racing. For the first time, I felt like I was starting to understand who I was and who I wanted to be. But Dr. Harper's face flashed in my mind, and I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. There were consequences to this connection, and they were closing in fast. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my dorm room door. Just a small piece of paper, folded neatly, with Elias's handwriting. "Meet me at the lake. 7 p.m. We need to talk." My heart sank. The lake was a quiet spot on the edge of campus, hidden by Pinesa Place where people went to be alone. The secrecy of it thrilled and terrified me. All day, I was a wreck. My roommate, Sam, noticed, tossing a football at me during lunch. "Dude, you look like you're about to puke. What's up?" "Nothing," I lied, dodging the ball. Sam was a good guy, but he was also the kind who'd make a joke about feelings and move on. I couldn't tell him about Elias, about the way my world was tilting because of a professor who saw me in ways no one else ever had. By 7 p.m., the lake was bathed in twilight, the water reflecting the last streaks of pink and orange. Elias was already there, sitting on a bench, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. "Elliot," he said, standing. "Thanks for coming." I sat beside him, the bench cold through my jeans. "What's this about?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I owe you an apology. I've been pushing you maybe too much. I saw myself in you, and I thought I could help. But I'm your professor. There's a line, and I'm afraid I've blurred it." His words hit like a slap. "You're not blurring anything," I said, my voice shaking. "You're the first person who's ever made me feel like I can be myself." He looked at me, his eyes softening, but there was pain there too. "You don't understand how dangerous this is. For both of us. If anyone misinterprets our meetings, it could cost me my job, and you your reputation, your future." I stood, my hands clenched. "Then why did you ask me here? Why show me your notebook? Tell me your story, if you're just going to pull back now." "Because I care about you," he said, his voice breaking. "More than I should." The air stilled. My heart pounded so loud I was sure he could hear it. "What does that mean?" I asked, stepping closer. He stood too, His face inches from mine. It means I'm trying to do the right thing. Elliot. But every time I'm with you, I forget what that is. Before I could respond, a twig snapped behind us. We both froze, turning to see Dr. Harper standing at the edge of the trees, her arms crossed. Professor Warren, she said, her voice icy. A word. Elias's face paled, but he nodded. Stay here, he whispered to me, then followed her out of earshot. I watched them, my stomach twisting as her gestures grew sharper, her voice a low hiss. When Elias returned, his jaw was set, his eyes distant. She's reporting me to the dean, he said flatly. She thinks our relationship is inappropriate. But it's not. I protested. We haven't done anything wrong. Haven't we? He asked, his voice heavy. I've let this get too personal. I should have known better. I wanted to scream, to tell him he was wrong, that what we had was real, not some scandal. But he was already walking away. His shoulders slumped. Go home, Elliot, he called over his shoulder. We'll talk when this blows over. But it didn't blow over. By the next day, the campus was buzzing. Whispers followed me in the halls. Eyes lingered too long. Someone had seen us at the lake, and the story had twisted into something ugly, a professor and his student, crossing lines that didn't exist. I wanted to find Elias, to fix this, but he wasn't in his office. His classes were canceled, replaced by a curt email from the department. Professor Warren is on leave until further notice. I felt like I was drowning. I'd finally started to embrace who I was, only to have it weaponized against the one person who'd helped me get there. That night, I went back to the lake, hoping he'd be there, but it was empty. I sat on the bench, pulling out my notebook, the one I'd started writing in after that poetry reading. I poured everything into it, the fear, the anger, the ache for Elias. When I got back to my dorm, Sam was waiting, his face serious for once. Elliot, what's going on with you and that professor? People are saying some messed up stuff. I froze, my heart racing. It's not what they think, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. Sam sighed, sitting on his bed. Look, man, I don't care who you like or what's going on, but you need to be careful. This place, it eats secrets like that. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to hide from everyone. Sam wasn't judging me, he was worried. I took a shaky breath and told him the truth, the words spilling out like a dam breaking. When I finished, he just nodded. You're still you, dude. Just figure out what you're fighting for. His words echoed Elias's, and I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to let rumors destroy what we'd started, not without a fight. I spent the next few days trying to track down Elias. His office was locked, his email unresponsive. I even went to the English department, but the secretary just gave me a tight-lipped smile and said, Professor Warren is unavailable. The rumors were growing, twisting into something vicious. People didn't just think we were too close, they were saying Elias had manipulated me, that I was some naive kid caught in his web. It made me sick. Elias wasn't a predator. He was the first person who'd ever made me feel seen. I had to find him, to tell him I wasn't going to let this ruin Heimer us. On a whim, I went back to the bookstore where we'd attended the poetry reading. The owner, a kind-eyed woman named Clara, recognized me. You're Elias's student, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. He's been here. You know, yesterday. Looked like he was carrying the world on his shoulders. Do you know where he is? I asked, my voice desperate. She hesitated, then scribbled an address on a scrap of paper. He's staying at a friend's place. But go easy on him, kid. He's hurting. The address led me to a small apartment building on the edge of town. My hands shook as I knocked on the door. When Elias opened it, he looked different, tired, unshaven, his usual polish replaced by a quiet defeat. Elliot, he said, his voice rough. You shouldn't be here. I had to, I said, stepping inside before he could stop me. The apartment was sparse. Just a couch, a coffee table, and stacks of books. I'm not letting you disappear. Not after everything. He sighed, closing the door. The dean's investigating. Harper's pushing for my termination. They think I crossed a line with you. Then tell them the truth, I said, my voice rising. Tell them we're just talking, that you're helping me. He laughed bitterly. The truth doesn't matter when people have already made up their minds. They see a gay professor and a student, and they assume the worst. I flinched at the word gay, not because it scared me, but because it felt so final, so real. Then we fight it, I said, together. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. You don't know what you're asking. This could ruin you to your scholarships, your reputation. I don't care, I said, my voice steady for the first time. I'm done hiding. I'm done letting other people decide who I am. For a moment, he just stared at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. Pride, maybe, or hope. Then he sat on the couch, gesturing for me to join him. You're braver than I was at your age, he said softly. But bravery comes at a cost. He told me about the investigation, about the meetings with the dean, the accusations of inappropriate conduct. He hadn't done anything wrong, but the optics were damning. A professor meeting a student off campus, sharing personal stories, it was enough to fuel suspicion. I'll talk to the dean, I said. I'll tell them it was my idea, that I needed someone to talk to. Elias shook his head. You don't have to do that. This is my mess. It's our mess, I corrected, my voice firm. You helped me find myself. I'm not letting you face this alone. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw tears in his eyes. You remind me so much of who I wanted to be, he said. Fearless. Honest. The air between us crackled, and I felt that pull again, the one that made me want to close the distance, to cross every line we'd been so careful to avoid. But before I could act, he stood, breaking the moment. Let's think this through, he said. We need a plan, not just passion. We spent the next hour strategizing. I'd write a letter to the dean, explaining our meetings, emphasizing that Elias had been a mentor, nothing more. He'd meet with his union rep, prepare a defense. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As I left, he grabbed my hand, his grip firm. Whatever happens, Elliot, you've already changed me. Thank you. I walked back to campus under a starlit sky, my heart a tangle of fear and determination. For the first time, I felt like I was fighting for something bigger than myself, not just for Elias, but for the right to be who I was, without shame. But when I got to my dorm, an email was waiting from the dean's office. Elliot Carter, please schedule a meeting with us regarding Professor Elias Warren. My stomach dropped. The fight was coming, whether I was ready or not. The dean's office was cold, the kind of sterile chill that made my skin prickle. Dean Rosenthal sat across from me, her glasses perched low on her nose, her expression unreadable. Dr. Harper was there too, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp as knives. I clutched my letter, the one I'd spent all night writing, my palms sweaty against the paper. Mr. Carter, Dean Rosenthal began. We're here to discuss your relationship with Professor Warren. We've received reports of inappropriate conduct. I swallowed, my throat dry. There's been a misunderstanding, I said, sliding the letter across her desk. Professor Warren has been my mentor. He's helped me with personal struggles. That's all. Dr. Harper scoffed, leaning forward. Personal struggles. Late-night meetings at bookstores. Secret notes to meet at the lake. That's not mentorship. That's unprofessional. At best. My face burned, but I held her gaze. He was helping me figure out who I am. I'm gay, and I was scared to admit it. He's the only one who made me feel like that was okay. The room went silent. Dean Rosenthal's pen paused mid-note. And even Dr. Harper seemed caught off guard. I hadn't planned to say it not like that. Not to them, but the words felt right. Like a weight lifting. I see, Dean Rosenthal said, her tone softer now. And you're saying there was no romantic involvement? No, I said firmly, even as my heart ached with the half-truth. I cared about Elias, more than I could admit. But nothing had happened. Not yet. He's been professional. He's been kind. He doesn't deserve to lose his job over this. Dr. Harper's lips pursed, but she didn't argue. Dean Rosenthal nodded, taking my letter. We'll review this. Mr. Carter, thank you for your honesty. You're free to go. I left the office, my legs shaky, my heart pounding. I'd done it. I'd told the truth, or at least part of it. But as I stepped into the hall, I saw Elias waiting, his face pale but hopeful. How did it go? He asked, his voice low. I told them you're my mentor. I said. I told them I'm gay. His eyes widened, a mix of pride and worry. Elliot, that was brave. But you didn't have to. I wanted to. I interrupted. I'm tired of hiding. He smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. You're stronger than you know. The investigation dragged on for days, each one heavier than the last. Elias was still on leave, and I felt his absence in every lecture, every empty office hour. The rumors didn't stop, but Sam and a few other friends started shutting them down, defending me in ways I hadn't expected. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone. One night, I got a text from Elias. Meet me at the bookstore. 8 p.m. My heart raced as I grabbed my jacket and headed out. When I arrived, the shop was closed, but Clara let me in, her smile warm. Elias was in the back, surrounded by books, a single lamp casting shadows across his face. I heard about your meeting with the dean, he said as I sat across from him. You didn't just defend me. You defended yourself. I shrugged, my cheeks warm. It felt right. He leaned forward, his voice low. Elliot, I need to be honest. I care about you more than a professor should. I've tried to keep this professional, but I can't pretend I don't feel something. My breath caught. I'd felt it too. That pull, that spark. But hearing him say it made it real. I feel it too, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He reached for my hand, then stopped, his fingers hovering in the air. We can't, he said, his voice breaking. Not now. Not while I'm your professor. I nodded, my throat tight. But after? He smiled, a flicker of hope in his eyes. After? We sat in silence, the weight of our words settling around us. For the first time, I felt like I could see a future one where I didn't have to hide, where I could love without fear. But we weren't there yet. There were still rules, still risks, still a world that wasn't ready for us. As I left the bookstore, I felt a fire inside me. I wasn't just fighting for Elias anymore. I was fighting for myself, for the right to love, to be seen, to live without shame. And no matter what happened next, I knew I'd never go back to hiding. The investigation ended a week later. The dean's office sent an email. Professor Elias Warren has been cleared of any misconduct and will resume teaching next semester. I read it 3 times, my heart soaring. Elias was safe. We were safe. But when I saw him back in the lecture hall, something had changed. He was still magnetic, still passionate, but there was a new distance in his eyes when he looked at me. After class, I stayed behind, my heart pounding as the other students left. Elliot, he said, his voice careful. We need to talk. I nodded, bracing myself. You're back. That's good, right? It is, he said, but his smile was tight. But we need to be careful. The dean's watching me. Harper's watching me. We can't be what we were. His words stung, But I understood. So what now? I asked, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Now, you keep growing, he said, his eyes softening. You keep writing. Keep being brave. And when you're no longer my student, we'll see where this goes. It wasn't the ending I wanted, but it was a spark of hope for a future we could build together. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Okay. After. The rest of the semester was a blur. I threw myself into my writing, filling notebooks with poems and stories, each one a step toward owning my truth. Elias was there, guiding me, but always at a distance, professional, careful, but still warm. I saw the way he watched me sometimes, a flicker of longing in his eyes, and it was enough to keep me going. By spring, I'd changed. I wasn't the quiet kid from Ohio anymore. I joined the campus LGBTQ+ group, made friends who understood me, shared my poems at open mics. Sam started calling me Poet Guy, and I laughed, feeling lighter than I ever had. At the end of the semester, Elias invited me to his office one last time. The investigation was behind us. The rumors had faded, and the air felt clearer. He handed me a new leather-bound notebook, his handwriting on the first page, to Elliot, who found his voice. Keep singing. I looked at him, my heart full. Thank you, I said, for everything. He smiled, and for a moment, I saw the man from the lake, from the bookstore, the one who'd made me believe I could be myself. You did the hard work, he said. I just gave you a push. We didn't talk about after that day. We didn't need to. I knew he'd be there, waiting, when the time was right. And I knew I'd be ready not just for him, but for the life I was finally starting to build. As I walked across campus, the spring air warm against my skin, I felt a quiet strength. I'd come out, faced rumors, fought for what mattered. I'd learned that love wasn't just about romance, it was about courage, about standing up for who you are, even when the world pushes back. Years later, I'd look back on that semester as the one that changed everything. Elias and I would find our way, not as professor and student, but as equals, building a life together in a world that was slowly learning to accept us. But even if we hadn't, I'd still carry his lessons with me, to be brave, to be honest, to love without fear. I opened the notebook he'd given me, my fingers tracing his words. And then I started to write.